For more than a century, the American trucking industry has run on a fragile chain of trust. A shipper has freight, a trucker has wheels, and standing somewhere between them is the freight broker, the middleman who connects two worlds and takes a cut for simply making the introductions. But in today's trucking economy, that relationship has transformed from uneasy partnership to outright battlefield. What was once a handshake agreement forged in the early days of logistics has now evolved into a deeply adversarial system. Drivers are angry, brokers are defensive, and the fight for survival has drawn lines in the sand across an industry already straining under inflation, low rates, and economic uncertainty. This is the story behind the growing war, a conflict tearing apart the supply chain from the inside, pitting the individuals who haul America's goods against the gatekeepers who profit from their labor. It's a war fought on rate sheets, load boards, text messages, and voicemail threats. A war fueled by desperation, collapsing freight volumes, corporate greed, and the basic human instinct to survive. To understand how the conflict began, you have to go back to the freight boom of 2020 and 2021. During those years, truck drivers were heroes. Freight rates were the highest in modern history. Carriers expanded. Owner-operators bought new trucks at record prices. Brokering freight was straightforward. There was more cargo than trucks, and brokers paid whatever it took to keep goods moving. But as the pandemic boom subsided, the freight economy reversed overnight. Demand crashed. Inventories swelled. Inflation hit families and businesses alike. And suddenly, the same brokers who once begged truckers to take loads now had more carriers than they knew what to do with. The imbalance created a power shift. And in every market where power shifts, exploitation follows. Truck drivers began to notice something disturbing. Rates were dropping, not because shippers were paying less, but because brokers were keeping more. A load from California to Texas that once paid $5,000 now barely offered $1,800. Drivers suspected that brokers were still billing the shipper the full price and pocketing the difference. Often, they were right. Because laws do not require brokers to disclose their margins, the truth remained buried. The tension began quietly. A trucker would call a broker and ask why the rates had fallen so sharply. The broker would respond with a sigh and say that this was the market, and if you did not want it, someone else would take it. And the worst part was, someone else did. Desperate carriers accepted loads at a loss. Owner-operators burned through savings. Some were so deep underwater on truck payments they could not afford to say no. And the brokers knew it. The seed of resentment turned into fire. Stories spread across trucker groups. One broker kept $3,000 off the top of a load. Another posted a rate that was 40% lower than what the shipper actually paid. Drivers began sharing screenshots, emails, and audio recordings. What started as speculation became evidence. The freight brokerage model was not just flawed, it was being exploited. The industry hit a breaking point in late 2023, when a movement erupted online. Truckers demanded transparency. They wanted brokers to reveal what shippers paid, just as real estate agents reveal what homes sell for. The brokers refused. They called it proprietary information. They argued that their margins were their business and no one else's. And so, the fighting intensified. Protests erupted at major freight hubs. Lines of trucks blocked entrances to brokerage offices. Drivers stood on the sidewalks with signs reading, "Fair rates, stop broker abuse, and transparency now." Some of the largest trucking influencers online launched campaigns calling out specific brokers by name. Companies that had allegedly squeezed drivers, posted fake rates, or delayed payments. The videos went viral. The public took notice. But behind the scenes, something even darker was happening. Desperate brokers, trying to maintain their margins in a collapsing market, began resorting to unethical tactics. Ghost loads flooded load boards, fake postings designed to manipulate the market. Brokers would advertise a lane for an absurdly low price, tricking carriers into thinking rates had crashed even further. Then once carriers lowered their expectations, brokers would swoop in with the real rate, which was still artificially low. Truckers call this psychological warfare. Brokers call it market adjustment. But the dirty tactics didn't stop there. Some brokers began using bait and switch techniques. They offered a load at a decent rate, waited until the driver was en route, then called back claiming the rate was entered incorrectly, or that the shipper reduced payment. The carrier, already halfway to pickup and low on fuel, had only two choices: accept the lower rate or go home empty. Most drivers accepted the loss. Brokers counted on it. The outrage grew louder. Then came the stories of forced dispatch through manipulation. Brokers intentionally waited until late afternoon, knowing drivers were running out of hours. They would withhold rate confirmations until the driver was stuck, then slip in new terms, additional stops, or reduced pay. The driver, already committed and legally required to deliver, had no leverage left. Truckers began calling this the broker chokehold. Meanwhile, shippers, the companies sending freight, often had no idea what was happening. They believed carriers were being paid fairly. Many never realized that the $4,000 they paid to move a load turned into $1,200 by the time it reached the driver. They didn't see the unpaid detention hours, the after-midnight unloadings, the falsified timestamps, or the penalties brokers imposed on drivers for delays caused by the shipper themselves. They saw only the invoice from the brokerage, paid it, and assumed the system worked. It didn't. As the freight recession deepened in 2024 and 2025, the broker wars escalated into open hostility. Drivers began recording their calls with brokers and uploading them for millions to hear. Clips of brokers laughing at driver complaints, refusing even small rate increases, or admitting they were keeping the difference became fuel for a growing movement. Trucking podcasts dissected these calls like courtroom evidence. Influencers posted breakdowns of rate sheets, exposing the broker margins in real time. Then came the whistleblowers, former brokers who revealed how the system truly worked. Some explained quotas that forced brokers to underpay carriers to hit profit targets. Others shared how their supervisors instructed them to never reveal the shipper rate, even if the carrier asks. One former broker admitted his company used software to monitor which carriers were desperate enough to accept loads under market value. Another said his employer expected brokers to lie during peak freight shortages, making carriers believe trucks were abundant so they could suppress rates. Drivers were not imagining it. The manipulation was real, institutional, and widespread. But as with every conflict, there are two sides, and the brokers had their own story to tell. Many brokers felt unfairly targeted. They argued that they were caught between angry carriers and demanding shippers, forced to negotiate in an unstable market. They claimed they were simply responding to supply and demand. They insisted that their margins were not excessive, that most brokers only kept a small percentage after costs, insurance, liability, and overhead. Some brokers said the real problem was not them. It was the influx of inexperienced carriers who bought trucks during the pandemic boom and now accepted loads too cheaply, artificially driving prices down for everyone. They pointed the finger at new drivers who did not know how to negotiate, foreign dispatch services that undercut rates, and mega carriers willing to take losses to dominate lanes. In their eyes, they were not villains, they were scapegoats. But even the most sympathetic brokers admitted the truth. The lack of transparency created a breeding ground for abuse. And whenever a system relies entirely on trust, but rewards dishonesty, corruption becomes inevitable. Truckers, however, didn't want apologies. They wanted change. Their biggest demand was simple: rate transparency. They wanted brokers to be required by law to reveal the shipper rate, the original price paid for hauling the load. They argued that without this information, negotiations were fundamentally unfair. A driver cannot negotiate a rate if the broker has all the information and the carrier has none. They believed transparency would stop brokers from keeping far more than their fair share. The brokers fought back viciously. They lobbied against transparency laws. They spent millions on legal campaigns. They argued that showing shipper rates would destroy their business model, breach confidentiality, and lead to chaos in the logistics system. And for the moment, their lobbying worked. The laws didn't pass. The secrecy remained intact. So truckers fought with the only weapons they had left: awareness, unity, and resistance. Online communities exploded. Drivers formed networks to share shipper rates, broker reputations, and real market data. They compared notes. They tracked patterns. They exposed dishonest brokers and elevated the honest ones. A rating system began to emerge from the grassroots, a system built by truckers, for truckers, bypassing the traditional power structure entirely. The war wasn't just about money anymore. It became a moral fight, a struggle for dignity in an industry that often treated drivers as disposable. Many brokers were surprised by the backlash. They had underestimated truckers. They did not expect the anger, the organization, or the public exposure, and they did not expect the world outside trucking to take interest. But people did. Because the broker wars were not just about freight. They were a reflection of a deeper issue in America: the widening gap between those who do the work and those who profit from the work. People recognized the story. They saw echoes of their own industries in it. Middlemen taking more while workers took less. Gig workers fighting for scraps while corporations soared. A system where transparency was avoided because it threatened profit. The broker wars were trucking's version of a much larger American story. When the protests reached Washington, hearings were held. Drivers testified. Brokers testified. Economists testified. The arguments went in circles. No laws changed. No reforms passed. But the conversation had shifted. And once a conversation shifts, it never returns to silence. Meanwhile, the freight market continued to deteriorate. Rates remained low. Fuel costs stayed high. Insurance became nearly unaffordable. Brokers found themselves under intense scrutiny. Even honest brokers struggled to rebuild trust. Drivers who once relied on brokers no longer wanted to pick up the phone. They preferred direct contracts with shippers. Some formed small co-ops to negotiate collectively. Others abandoned traditional freight altogether, turning to hotshot loads, local routes, or entirely different industries just to survive. Both sides suffered. The conflict was leaving casualties everywhere. Beneath it all, a dangerous new threat was growing, including fraud, identity theft, fake brokers, and scam carriers using the chaos to exploit both brokers and drivers. But neither side could fully fight the scammers while they were busy fighting each other. The industry was tearing itself apart. And this is where the next chapter begins.